After 40, a woman stops chasing approval and starts honoring her truth. She craves peace over validation, depth over attention, and solitude over noise. She heals her inner wounds, embraces her body, and chooses authenticity. What she secretly wants is freedom to live life unapologetically on her own terms. There comes a moment in every woman's life, often around the age of 40, when she begins to feel an unexplainable shift within herself. The world may not notice it, but inside her, something powerful is happening. She starts to quietly redefine who she truly is. This isn't a loud revolution or a dramatic transformation. It's an internal awakening. For years, she may have lived by roles, responsibilities, and expectations, being the caretaker, the achiever, the pleaser, the woman who made sure everyone else was comfortable while she silently carried her own discomfort. But now she begins to question it all. Who am I beyond what I've been taught to be? What do I actually want when no one is watching? This redefining is not about rejecting the past. It's about reclaiming herself from it. She realizes that much of her life has been built on the voices of others, what society told her she should look like, how she should love, how she should age. But now she feels a quiet rebellion rising inside her. She's no longer interested in fitting into molds that no longer fit her spirit. The woman she was in her 20s was eager to be everything for everyone. The woman she becomes in her 40s starts being everything for herself. There is a certain grace that comes with this phase. She doesn't need to announce her growth or prove her worth anymore. She just moves differently, more consciously, more calmly, more truthfully. Her choices begin to come from self-awareness instead of fear. She starts saying no without guilt and yes without hesitation. She begins to measure success by how peaceful she feels rather than how much she achieves. And in that shift, she rediscovers her power, the quiet, grounded, unshakable kind. It's not about chasing youth or clinging to what's gone. It's about celebrating the woman she's becoming. She stops competing with her younger self and starts admiring her present strength. She learns that beauty is not in perfection, but in presence, in the way she carries her scars, her softness, and her wisdom all at once. The quiet redefinition is her way of saying, I'm no longer available for anything that cost me my peace. She understands now that aging is not a loss, it's evolution. In her 40s, she learns that her worth was never dependent on her roles, her appearance, or her validation from others. It was always within her, waiting to be claimed. This awakening gives her a new sense of freedom. She becomes the author of her story again, rewriting it with gentleness, honesty, and power. The woman who once tried to fit in now realizes she was never meant to. She was meant to redefine what being a woman truly means, to live authentically, love deeply, and walk through life on her own terms, with a quiet strength that no one can take away. There comes a time when a woman grows tired of performing for acceptance. After 40, she starts to feel the weight of all the years she spent trying to please everyone, parents, partners, friends, society. She begins to see how much of her energy went into seeking approval that never truly satisfied her soul. The compliments that once felt like validation now feel empty, and the opinions of others start to lose their power over her. She realizes that no matter how perfect she tried to be, someone always had something to say. So, she stops living for applause and starts living for peace. This is the beginning of her liberation, when she no longer measures her worth by how others see her. She understands that approval is a moving target, and chasing it only keeps her trapped in self-doubt. The opinions that once shaped her decisions now sound like background noise. She no longer feels the need to explain herself, justify her emotions, or soften her truth to make others comfortable. She learns to trust her own voice, even when it shakes, and that becomes her greatest freedom. In her younger years, she might have feared being misunderstood or judged. But now she accepts that not everyone will understand her choices, and that's perfectly fine. She's no longer seeking validation, she's seeking alignment. She starts saying what she truly means, wearing what she feels confident in, and walking away from places where she's not valued. The woman she is now doesn't chase attention. She attracts respect by being unapologetically herself. This freedom doesn't come easily. It often comes after heartbreak, disappointment, and exhaustion. She had to lose herself a few times to realize that approval was never love. It was control disguised as care. And as she untangles herself from the need to be liked, she rediscovers a deeper form of self-respect. She learns that peace is more fulfilling than people-pleasing, and self-acceptance is louder than praise. There's something incredibly magnetic about a woman who no longer seeks permission to exist. She carries herself with quiet confidence, not arrogance. She listens to her intuition more than the noise around her. She knows that being true to herself might make her less popular, but it makes her more powerful. When she stops performing, she starts living. When she stops proving, she starts growing. This new freedom becomes her emotional armor. She is no longer defined by how much she is wanted, but by how deeply she knows herself. She lets go of the pressure to be perfect and embraces the beauty of being real. The world's approval fades in importance because she has finally given herself the one thing she always needed: her own permission to be who she truly is, without apology, without fear, and without needing anyone to clap for her anymore. There comes a point when a woman decides she's done hiding pieces of herself just to make others comfortable. After 40, she begins to realize that authenticity is not a luxury, it's a necessity. For years, she may have worn different versions of herself to fit into rooms, relationships, or roles that demanded her silence more than her truth. But now, something inside her refuses to shrink anymore. She's tired of editing her emotions, of pretending to be fine, of dimming her light to make others feel secure. She understands that being authentic is not rebellion, it's self-respect. She starts to show up as she is, raw, imperfect, and real. She no longer tries to be the woman who's always agreeable, always smiling, always holding everything together. She allows herself to feel deeply, to express honestly, to say what she truly means without rehearsing her words. She knows that her honesty may make some people uncomfortable, but she no longer sees that as her problem to fix. The fear of losing people fades because she's more afraid now of losing herself again. Her authenticity becomes her quiet strength. It's in the way she owns her story, the mistakes, the heartbreaks, the lessons, and the resilience that shaped her. She doesn't seek pity or perfection. She seeks truth. She realizes that authenticity attracts what is meant for her and repels what no longer aligns. When she's real, she stops begging for love because real love meets her where she stands, not where she pretends to be. There's power in the way she carries her emotions now. She doesn't apologize for crying, for needing rest, for saying no, or for wanting more. She's no longer afraid of being too much. She's too wise to dilute herself for people who can't handle her depth. This unapologetic energy changes everything. The way she speaks, the way she walks, the way she connects. Her confidence no longer screams. It whispers quietly through her presence. She's learned that pretending only leads to emptiness. Being herself, however, brings peace. The opinions of others start to blur into the background as her own inner voice becomes louder and clearer. She trusts that voice now, the one she once ignored for the sake of keeping the peace. And in doing so, she finds a new kind of freedom. Unapologetic authenticity is her rebirth. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who she always was before the world told her to tone it down. She no longer needs validation because her truth validates her existence. She stands firm in her identity, embracing both her softness and her strength. And in this raw, honest space, she finally discovers the kind of peace that only comes when you stop pretending and start living as your whole, beautiful, imperfect self. There comes a stage in every woman's journey when she begins to meet the little girl she once was. the one she left behind while trying to survive, please, and prove herself. After 40, this meeting becomes sacred. She begins to see how much of her current pain is rooted in the wounds of that younger self, the girl who was told to stay quiet, to be good, to not want too much, to make others happy before herself. She realizes that she has carried that little girl's pain for decades, disguising it as strength, independence, or perfection. But now she's tired of pretending she's unbreakable. She's ready to heal, not by ignoring the past, but by facing it with compassion. Healing the inner girl is not about reliving the hurt. It's about listening to what was silenced. It's about sitting with the version of herself that never felt seen or heard, and finally saying, I understand you. She begins to forgive herself for not knowing better, for tolerating what she didn't deserve, for accepting love that felt like conditions. She learns that strength is not suppressing emotion. It's allowing it to flow, to be felt, to be understood. In this stage, she starts recognizing the patterns that were born from her unhealed wounds, the constant need for validation, the fear of abandonment, the hesitation to speak her truth. Instead of judging herself for them, she begins to nurture herself through them. She no longer shames her younger self for the choices she made in survival mode. She honors her for doing the best she could. That shift from judgment to compassion becomes her medicine. She learns to mother herself in ways she was never mothered. She gives herself permission to rest, to cry, to ask for what she needs. She stops expecting others to heal the parts of her that only she can touch. She begins to replace the voice of criticism with the voice of comfort. And as she does, she feels lighter, not because life suddenly became easy, but because she's no longer carrying old pain disguised as control. The woman she is now becomes a safe space for the girl she once was. She no longer hides her vulnerability. She embraces it as the bridge between her past and her peace. In healing her inner girl, she stops seeking love in the wrong places because she finally learns to give it to herself. She starts living from a place of wholeness instead of emptiness. The walls she built for protection begin to turn into boundaries that protect her peace, not her fear. And slowly, as she continues to listen, forgive, and nurture, she realizes that the woman she is today is the one her inner girl always needed. Strong yet gentle, wise yet tender, fierce yet loving. That realization becomes the most profound kind of healing the moment she finally comes home to herself. At some point after 40, a woman begins to lose interest in what's shallow. The surface-level conversations, the small talk, the performative relationships, they no longer feed her soul. She's spent years investing her time and energy in things that looked good on the outside, but left her empty on the inside. Now she craves something different, something deeper. She doesn't want connection for the sake of company. She wants connection that nourishes her spirit. She wants honesty, vulnerability, and truth, not masks, not games, not illusions. This desire for depth begins to shape everything about her. The people she keeps, the work she does, the way she spends her days. She's no longer impressed by charm. She's moved by consistency. She doesn't chase excitement. She values peace. She's not looking for people who flatter her. She's drawn to those who understand her. She would rather sit in silence with someone who feels genuine than be surrounded by noise that lacks meaning. Her soul has matured, and so has her definition of fulfillment. She starts to seek experiences that awaken her rather than distract her. She becomes more mindful of what she allows into her energy. She's learned that depth doesn't come from how much someone says, but from how real they are when they speak. She finds beauty in slowness, in meaningful conversations, in eye contact that says more than words, in the comfort of being understood without having to explain herself. Superficial attention no longer satisfies her. Compliments that used to excite her now feel hollow if they lack sincerity. She's been through enough to know that not everything that shines is gold. So she starts choosing differently. Friends who challenge her to grow, partners who meet her emotionally, work that aligns with her values. She doesn't settle for halfway connections anymore because she's finally learned that her energy is sacred. This shift often confuses those who once knew her. They may think she's become distant, less social, or harder to please, but the truth is she's just evolved. She's not rejecting people. She's rejecting the version of herself that tolerated emptiness. She no longer wants to exist on autopilot, constantly giving without receiving, speaking without being heard, loving without being seen. Depth has become her new standard, not out of arrogance, but out of wisdom. She wants conversations that make her think, relationships that help her grow, and moments that remind her she's alive. She finds beauty in truth, even when it's uncomfortable, because she's learned that realness is the foundation of peace. She doesn't want more things, she wants more meaning. The woman she is now would rather have a handful of deep connections than a room full of empty ones. Because at this stage of her life, she knows that true fulfillment isn't found in how much she has, but in how deeply she feels, connects, and lives. There comes a time in a woman's life, often after 40, when she stops seeing her body as a project to fix and begins to see it as a home to honor. For years, she may have looked at herself through the eyes of others, measuring her worth by beauty standards, comparing herself to younger versions of who she was, or feeling the pressure to stay forever flawless. But with time, something within her shifts. She realizes her body isn't something to fight against. It's something that has carried her through everything. The scars, the stretch marks, the wrinkles, they are not flaws. They are evidence of life lived, battles survived, and strength earned. She begins to reclaim her body not through obsession, but through appreciation. She listens to it more closely now, not to criticize, but to care. She feeds it what gives her energy. She moves it in ways that make her feel alive, and she rests it when it needs peace. The mirror no longer dictates her mood, her energy does. She starts to understand that beauty isn't in appearance, but in presence, in the glow that comes when she's connected to herself. Her relationship with her body becomes sacred. She no longer punishes it for not fitting into unrealistic ideals. She forgives herself for the years she spent chasing perfection and learns that true confidence isn't about how she looks. It's about how she feels in her own skin. She stops seeking validation from the outside world and finds comfort in how her body carries her spirit. This acceptance gives her a new kind of power, quiet, grounded, and magnetic. Reclaiming her energy goes hand in hand with reclaiming her body. She becomes protective of her peace, more intentional with her time, and more selective with where she invests her emotions. She no longer says yes out of guilt or obligation. Every yes now comes from alignment, not pressure. She starts noticing how certain people, environments, or habits drain her, and she distances herself without apology. Energy is her new currency, and she spends it wisely. She learns that aging isn't a decline, but a return to authenticity, to wisdom, to balance. She stops rushing, multitasking, and stretching herself thin. She slows down, breathes deeper, and reconnects with the rhythm of her own life. Her body becomes her teacher, reminding her that rest is not laziness, and that stillness can be just as powerful as movement. As she reclaims her body and energy, she feels more at home within herself than ever before. She no longer lives in resistance. She lives in harmony. Every breath, every heartbeat, every quiet moment of self-acceptance becomes an act of gratitude. She understands now that her body is not an image, it's an experience. And the most beautiful thing she can do for it is to love it, fully, gently, and unapologetically. There comes a stage in a woman's life when she begins to crave her own company more than the noise of the world. After 40, solitude stops feeling like loneliness and starts feeling like liberation. For years, she may have surrounded herself with people, commitments, and constant activity, believing that being busy meant being valuable. But now, she finds peace in silence. She learns that solitude isn't an absence of love or connection, it's a return to herself. In those quiet moments, she hears her own thoughts clearly for the first time in years, and that clarity becomes her power. She no longer fears being alone because she's discovered that solitude is where she grows the most. It's where she untangles her emotions, recharges her spirit, and reconnects with her truth. She realizes that she doesn't need to be constantly surrounded to feel complete. She doesn't need validation, conversation, or distraction to feel alive. In solitude, she begins to understand her own rhythm, what brings her peace, what drains her energy, and what truly makes her happy. She becomes her own safe place. This kind of peace is not easy to find. It often comes after years of noise, years of giving, pleasing, and losing herself in the needs of others. But now, when she sits alone with a cup of tea, reads a book in silence, or takes a walk by herself, she feels whole. She's not escaping life. She's connecting to it in the most honest way possible. The quiet no longer scares her because she's filled it with self-awareness, self-compassion, and gratitude. In solitude, she becomes more selective about the company she keeps. She no longer entertains relationships that drain her or conversations that lead nowhere. She values people who bring peace, not pressure. And because she's comfortable being alone, she's no longer afraid to walk away from anything that disturbs her inner calm. Solitude teaches her boundaries, not as walls, but as sacred spaces of self-respect. She learns that solitude doesn't mean isolation. It means independence. It's the freedom to enjoy her own thoughts, to choose her own pace, to love without losing herself. It's where she remembers her strength and realigns her purpose. The woman she becomes in solitude is more grounded, more centered, and more connected to something greater than herself. Through this stillness, she rediscovers her essence. She feels her intuition sharpening, her creativity returning, and her heart expanding. She starts to see solitude as a gift, the space where her spirit breathes and her wisdom unfolds. And once she tastes that peace, she never wants to give it up. She no longer fears being alone because she's realized that the most empowering relationship she will ever have is the one she builds with herself. And in that sacred space, she finally finds her freedom. There comes a moment in a woman's life when she begins to realize that her identity cannot be confined to the roles she plays. After 40, she starts to question the labels she's carried for years: mother, wife, daughter, professional, caretaker, and wonders who she is beyond them. For so long, her purpose may have been defined by how much she could give, how well she could serve, and how effectively she could meet everyone else's needs. But now she begins to feel a quiet calling within her, a desire to live for herself, to rediscover the woman who exists outside the expectations of others. This awakening doesn't mean she stops loving the people around her or abandons her responsibilities. It simply means she starts including herself in the circle of her own care. She begins to ask deeper questions. What makes me feel alive? What did I dream of before the world told me who I should be? What am I here to create, to learn, to become? These questions are not about rebellion, they are about truth. They remind her that she was never meant to live only through others. She was meant to live as herself. For many women, this realization comes with both fear and freedom. It's uncomfortable to admit that the life she built may have muted parts of her that were once vibrant. Yet it's also empowering to know that she can still rewrite her story. She understands now that her purpose doesn't have to be grand or glamorous. It just has to be meaningful. It could be creating something beautiful, helping others in quiet ways, pursuing a passion she once set aside, or simply living with intention and presence. She no longer needs to prove her worth through her productivity or her sacrifices. She begins to value being overdoing, presence over performance. She understands that fulfillment isn't found in constantly achieving, but in living in alignment with her truth. She starts to listen to her intuition more than the noise around her, trusting that her life has seasons and that every phase carries a unique purpose. As she embraces this shift, she finds a renewed sense of energy and clarity. She begins to protect her time, invest in her growth, and explore what her soul truly craves. She may pick up a long-forgotten passion, start something new, or simply create space to breathe and be. She learns that purpose doesn't have to be loud or visible. It can be quiet, steady, and deeply personal. This understanding transforms the way she lives. She no longer defines herself by the titles she holds, but by the depth of her connection to life. Her worth is no longer measured by what she gives to others, but by how truthfully she lives her own story. And in that realization, she discovers a purpose that isn't tied to a role. It's tied to her essence, her evolution, and her freedom to simply be. At 40 and beyond, a woman begins to awaken to her truest self. The noise of the world starts to fade, and what remains is clarity, the kind that comes only through experience, loss, love, and growth. She no longer lives for approval, nor does she chase perfection. She chooses peace over pressure, meaning over appearance, and authenticity over acceptance. Every lesson, every heartbreak, and every silent night has brought her to this version of herself, the one who finally understands that freedom isn't found in control, but in surrendering to who she really is. She has redefined her worth, reclaimed her body, and made peace with her past. She has learned to be alone without feeling lonely, to love without losing herself, and to give without being emptied. Her journey is no longer about seeking validation, it's about creating alignment. She knows now that aging is not a decline, it's an evolution into wisdom, depth, and quiet power. The woman she is after 40 walks differently. She carries herself with grace, not because life became easier, but because she became stronger. She no longer hides her scars. She wears them as proof that she has survived, healed, and grown. Her energy is sacred, her boundaries are firm, and her heart beats with purpose. She is not who she used to be, and that's her greatest victory. What she secretly wants now isn't more attention, but more peace. Not more possessions, but more presence. She desires a life that feels right, not one that just looks right. And as she continues to walk this path, guided by self-respect, grounded in truth, and fueled by inner strength, she becomes what every woman hopes to be, free, whole, and unapologetically herself.